So the other day I found out that the CIA is preparing some kind of criminal referral against me, a crime report. What's that crime? Talking to people in Iran before the war.
Urgent message for the Iranian government right here. I need missiles here tonight. Israel's Channel 12 did a report on the new Patriot battery system. It's right here at the Palashamin Air Force Base. It's brand new, by the way, Iran, so if you want to fire off a few missiles that way, there's only 6 interceptors in this direction, so you're going to need about 8. You're going to need a bigger barrage than normal. So what I'm assuming, guys, is we fire at Tel Aviv, divert it south, and maybe you can even get some interceptions over here just to waste some more. People with tens of millions of followers are posting my video with all of my accounts. 4 million followers, 400,000 followers, wanting me to get arrested for treason. Treason, arrest him, treason, traitor. Do you know what the penalty for treason is? Death. They want me to die.
We were born and raised in New York, and we want everyone here to stay in New York. You don't get to come from outside and then tell everyone else.
私たちはニューヨークで生まれ育ちました。そしている皆さん、ここにいる皆さんにはニューヨークに残ってほしいのです。私はアイセスに忠誠を誓う。アラフアクバル。
これらの卑劣な行為の原因は明らかです。白人至上主義です。
On March 7th, at a New York City protest against Islam, counter-protesters threw homemade bombs at protesters and the police. The initial bomb throw was directed over the top of leftist counter-protester Walter Masterson, as he was speaking in support of Islam. The next day, Masterson doubled down on his rhetoric, even while underscoring the ridiculousness of being welcoming to people who crafted a genuine working shrapnel bomb, which, had it gone off, would likely have killed or maimed him for life. The image became instantly iconic as meme masters memorialized the perfect juxtaposition of leftist tolerance and the violence they want us to tolerate. Many people have pointed to the episode as a textbook case of suicidal empathy. Later in the week, a group of Antifa terrorists arrested for ambushing ICE in Texas were successfully convicted. Antifa's response from their supporters has been to threaten the jury that convicted them and threaten Andy Ngo, whose coverage has been less than flattering. On March 14th, American TikToker Ethan Levins was discovered using social media to call out the geolocations of Patriot missile batteries in Israel, explicitly telling Iran that they needed to target those locations. People were rightly outraged, pointing out that those locations may in fact be manned by American soldiers. Levin's reaction to this outcry wasn't one of regret or sorrow. He instead cried foul in a follow-up video where his sterling cross is prominently displayed around his neck. He expressed outrage over the thousands of people calling for the ultimate penalty for his actions. "They're calling for my death," he cried in shock, after he himself called for many more people to die, because if those missiles aren't shot down by defense batteries, where do they land? Levins? A subsequent scandal arose when Tucker Carlson claimed that his communications are being spied on by the CIA and that the agency has been building a case against him along with the DOJ. Many people have noticed that this is a very odd thing to say. Is Tucker trying to pre-bunk any bad press that might come out in light of such an investigation? Playing the outrage game on his show only feeds the narrative that he's conscious of having done something wrong, people say. Maybe that's his intention, but I don't think so. I have my doubts. Tucker's communications wouldn't have been intercepted by the CIA, a high-level target along the lines of the Iranian president. If the CIA was doing any monitoring, they would likely have been getting that collection from the NSA, which is the agency that is, in fact, specializing in and responsible for the collection of signals intelligence, or SIGINT. I know because this was once my job. The NSA has minimization procedures to handle inadvertent collection of identifiers linked to U.S. persons. The SOP doesn't allow such information to be unmasked. If there was a good reason to have Tucker's identity unmasked, it wouldn't have been the CIA doing the asking, but the NSA. What I'm saying is that whether or not the CIA was in the loop, and they very likely could have been if this is all true, the primary responsibility for the material collected would remain with the originating agency, the NSA. So his inclusion of the CIA in this story is very mysterious. On top of that, the CIA is prohibited from doing domestic operations, which would have included Carlson. On top of that, the CIA has no domestic law enforcement mandate. On top of that, even if the CIA were building a case against Carlson, giving him a heads up would have ruined more than one high-level career in American intelligence and DC justice. I know for a fact that outside of a wanted poster, the DOJ doesn't do courtesy calls to let their targets know they're being investigated. Again, this knowledge comes from personal experience. Tucker's story feels like a Candace Owens-style plea for attention, complete with Hollywood misconceptions about the world of intelligence to add some melodramatic sensationalism to the scene. I'm not 100% sure he's lying. It's more like 91.4%. Other than the fact that all these happened within about a single week, why am I bringing these incidents up? Well, each of these stories brings home a powerful attribute our political opponents bring to bear in almost any situation that the right struggles to replicate: the act of tactical martyrdom. Masterton's defense of people who nearly killed him as being preferable to having to listen to anti-Islam protesters spew wrongthink isn't just a case of suicidal empathy. Masterton's instinct to protect the clear aggressors in this incident is because he understands the power of victimhood, and terrorist bombers are seldom thought of as innocent victims. Masterton's clumsy attempts at deflection serve to both distract from his own lack of survival instincts while laboring to maintain the status quo perception on the left. The Antifa terror cell supporters are also examples of tactical martyrdom. Now that the convictions have been secured, they're all victims of injustice. Their hyperbolic reaction now serves as a basis for all kinds of future violent political actions. So prepare yourself for that. This is the objective of martyrdom. It activates a sort of raw emotional response that promotes action without thought to consequences. And unthinking violence is exactly the kind of thing the Democrats have been agitating for since November 2024. Levins, like Masterton, believes that all the world hates conservative Americans for the same reason and in the same manner he does. It doesn't cross either of their minds that there could be a shared connection between Americans that transcends political differences. All of this is based on a sense of righteous entitlement stemming from perceived grievances that they believe have been inflicted by conservatives. At the same time, his primary reaction to being called out is exactly what we should expect: to claim the mantle of martyr. I'm being targeted for trying to enable mass civilian casualties. Woe is me. Then there's Tucker. Social media is awash with hypotheses about his situation. Like I said, this feels like theatrics to me. But even if it's a genuine tale, going live with the information serves more than just sensationalism. Either way, he's jockeying to become the next martyr. If successful in pulling this narrative off, he will in fact find himself in possession of considerable cachet, a survivor of being targeted by the CIA. It appears the left has learned the worst possible lesson from their missteps in over-prosecuting Trump in the lead-up to the previous election. It's undeniable that by doing so, they made him the benighted underdog, and that this ultimately helped to endear him to the majority of American voters, including, I must add, a lot of the felons I met while I was in prison. But we have to point out that Trump wore the mantle of victim with a stoic manliness that the left cannot imitate. He absorbed the slings and arrows and even had the wherewithal to make that iconic face that became his mugshot. That's generally how conservatives tend to handle victimhood. As J6ers, we tried to weaponize our situation in DC Doc in the same way that leftists do, but this was surprisingly difficult. There's something about constantly cluing for attention and pity that cuts against the conservative ideological grain, especially for men. Focusing on our victim status only made us feel more helpless and pitiful. I don't think leftists feel this way. I think it's because they venerate their ideological martyrs even in the face of facts, as is the case for George Floyd. Any claim to being a victim for them is an act of defiance and a naked attempt to grasp at power. When leftists call for violence because we call them out for violence, they aren't exactly engaged in nuanced thinking. They're willfully ignoring any and all facts on the ground that could even remotely challenge their victim narrative, even when asserting that victim narrative encourages the type of violence that threatens to embrace them as well. There's a fundamental difference in how we see ourselves in the world and approach reality. I have a feeling we're only going to see more examples of this tactical use of victims as the election year grinds on. It's not the result of any kind of memo or action plan. These are the actions of people who are desperate and searching their own warped psychology for ideas. Ideas we cannot forget or forgive, rationalize and call for violence against us at both the macro and micro levels. Each of these instances, Masterton, the Antifa terror supporters, Levins, and Carlson, are all working coincidentally as products of the same worldview. It's a leftist mindset. It's also a militant Islamist mindset. People whose only guiding ideal in life is that their every problem is somehow someone else's fault, and the only antidote to this learned helplessness is unfettered, violent rage. That means it's not so much that the psychology is the product of the ideologies, but that the ideologies are chosen by those whose psychological needs and hang-ups call for it. Fides quaerens intellectum, as the saying goes. This gives us an insight into the Red-Green Alliance. It's not a uniting of ideas or beliefs at any level, but of feelings. Feelings that lead them to embrace similarly violent exterminationist methods and share similar targets, but for completely different reasons. Both groups are processing their failures in the same way, which is to foist their failings on a convenient scapegoat. In truth, it's not a red-green alliance, but a red-green coincidence. A union born of a shared but poisonous coping method, one where the success of either faction means the certain death for the other. For now, they're ambivalent to the inherent danger of this dynamic, preferring to see it as a joining of forces in the name of ridding the world of their perceived mutual nemesis. But for their own sake and for the sake of American society, this mentality and the violence it enables can't go unanswered for another second.